Welcome back, revolutionaries, and this is the Secular Homeschool Revolution podcast, a space for BIPOC progressive secular homeschoolers and allies who are here to learn and grow. I am your host, Ashley. I want you guys to know I am a huge homeschooling advocate, but first and foremost, I am a child advocate. And while we're here to talk about homeschooling, we have to talk about the good and the bad. And we can't ignore the fact that abuse and neglect happens in homeschooling environments, and we're not going to shy away from it. So we are committing ourselves to changing the narrative, but we're also committing to protect our kids. And I do know in states like Texas, where it is, very low regulations in regards to homeschooling, that is where this new act comes in called the Make Homeschool Safe Act. And I know y'all always hear me say, I've had a couple episodes about it, that homeschooling has always been political. And right now, it feels like it's in this eye of the storm because we do have a lot of school choice debates. And with this new Make Homeschool Safe Act entering the chat, there's a lot going on. The Coalition of the Responsible Homeschool Education is a strong supporter and the creator of the Make Homeschool Safe Act. And today, we are going to look at this legislation and we're going to acknowledge, the goods and the bad parts of it. But we need to emphasize that there is a critical need for accountability to protect our kids. But before we get heavy into our topic, let me give you guys just a quick, peek at what's going on in my life. So, a sneak peek into what's been going on with me. You guys, thank you so much for the support. My episode on school choice last week received 100 listens or 100 plays in 24 hours. If you have been following my podcasting journey, especially through first season, y'all know as of January 2024, last year, I was excited to have 10 followers on all the platforms on my show. Now I have I'm close to 500 followers on all the platforms collectively. I received 100 listens just on Spotify for my school choice episode. So celebrate the small wins and the big wins, and don't let small-minded people who have no intention of growing stopping you. I remember having a conversation with women, and we were just talking about ways we want to grow. Just because we're homeschooling, doesn't mean, our lives stop, and just constantly wanting to just evolve. And I thought that was interesting that some people, and you know what, it is fine for some people to not want to grow and evolve and be fully content in their lives. But if that's not your mindset, it's okay to migrate towards people who are going to push you. So for example, I called my friend. I was really, really upset about something, and it wasn't aligned quite how I wanted it to in my life. And so I was having to figure out a different direction. So she listened to me and she was like, yeah, that's messed up. So what are we going to do? Are we going to figure out and do it our own? Da, 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 da. She's like, I know you want this. I want this for you. So how are we going to figure it out? That's the energy I want in my circle. Or I was telling another friend and she was like, you know what? You can do it. Don't let this stop you. Da 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 da. And we're game planning, right? That's the energy I have in my inner circle, and I'm so thankful. But if that's not the type of energy you need in your circle, that's fine too. But I love I'm surrounded by mostly women, that energy of support that's not limiting, that's not full of jealousy, that is just pure, authentic love. I wish that for everyone. Another cool thing that we did, me and my co-founders, were able to meet with some philanthropists, local philanthropists, and talk to them about what homeschooling looks like and what it looks like for our community because, they checked our website, our social media, our blog posts, and they were truly intrigued because the way we're doing the homeschooling in a very intentional, secular, decolonizing, inclusive way looks different than what they've ever known homeschooling to be. So we had to talk for 30 minutes. We were asked questions for 30 minutes. They treated us to lunch. And that felt really good to just talk and share our story because the next day we had our Valentine's party for our community. And in the morning, I had like a memory of like our first Valentine's Day party. And it was so sweet. It was when we were still like a cottage co op. And the kids all had brown paper bags and they, passed their bag around and their friends wrote affirmations and then slipped the card in. It was so sweet. But like fast forward to now, our third Valentine's Day party with our community, and we had close to 50 kids. It was pure, it was noise, it was chaos, it was love. They had a tea party and a V-Day exchange, and everyone, brought tea, brought sugar, brought treats. It was very much a community effort. But to talk about our growth and then to actually see our growth, it really is a testament to the idea that if you build it, people will come. And then the last thing I want to tell y'all. So Kari, my middle kid, she asked for a chessboard. And, she asked my mom for it. My mom found her like a beginning chessboard. She's reading through the rules, telling me about the rules, practicing, a game with her sister, and then has major beef with the king. And she wanted to switch the king and the queen roles out. And I said, well, if you go and play other people, they're not going to understand your non-traditional rules. And she's like, that's okay, Mom, because I'm just going to explain to them that the way they're playing is because of the patriarchy. And I was like, okay, touche. But she's also the same kid who wanted to be Zeus and thought Zeus deserved to be a woman, and was like what is it, like a non-chauvinistic, inclusive Zeus. Anyway, so she's 8. She's obsessed with the women's rights movement, the suffragettes. I'm here for it. Imagine where this is going to go in the next few years. Let's continue to raise strong girls with big voices, strong kids with big voices who are rooted in empathy and justice. Anyway, so let's get started in our topic for the day. So let's be honest. The government's use of the word freedom in discussions around education, whether you're homeschooling or not, and particularly when it's associated with BIPOC communities, has a very ugly history. So let's think about the term freedom, and they used it to allow people to choose segregated schools. That's part of the redlining history. And when they had said freedom, they used it to justify denying Black kids equal access to education. So we can't forget these historical examples, and we must be critical on how these terms are being used today, right? So freedom, school choice, very much aligned. And we need to be informed and involved in the conversation. And when I mean informed, you cannot get all your news source from TikTok. You can't get all your news source from Facebook memes or Facebook groups. It's nice, and they can lead you in the directions on where to look at said information, but look at NPR. They're under attack. Donate if you can. Look at PBS News, BBC. Those are some good resources as well. But again, you can't just be reactive because of something you saw on the internet. Like, you need to do your work. You need to do your due diligence to figure out what it actually means. So let's break down, or you know what, before we break down, let me reiterate who the Make Homeschool Safe Act is. It is led by the Coalition of Responsible Homeschool Education. This coalition is made up of former adults who were formerly homeschooled, and you can read their bios on the website. Some of them explain a few of them had great homeschooling experiences, and the others had very negative homeschooling experiences. And if you go on their social media, like their Instagram, and read the comments under some of the topics, it is absolutely heartbreaking to see how these these kids lived like a very tortured high school childhood under the guise of homeschooling. There's one graphic that's posted that's very real, that some homeschoolers do not give, and I've mentioned it before, their daughters access to science simply because they are girls. And if you go to the comments, you'll see very real stories of this happening. Um, and so, again, we can't continue to change the narrative of homeschooling without acknowledging the very big components of neglect and abuse. And that's why organizations like the Coalition of Responsible Homeschool Education is important, and that we support them and the work that they do and acknowledge these people's truths. Okay, so let's talk about the Make Homeschool Safe Act. I know some of you are concerned. I'm concerned about government interference, especially in light of this new administration and all the trash that they're doing. But your concerns are valid. But again, we also have to acknowledge the current reality. Under these current laws, the situation is alarming. So, one fact that I pulled from the Coalition of Responsible Homeschooling website was 47 states allow convicted sex offenders, child abusers, and others with violent records to homeschool kids. Think about that. Think about that power dynamic in a house. If you're a child, 6, 7 years old, and you're in a home with someone who has been convicted of sex crimes, and you're homeschooled and there's no one checking in on you. Think about it. Next, all 50 states allow kids to be withdrawn from school to be homeschooled during and after a child welfare investigation. That is what we call a red flag. I know when I worked in a school, we had this one particular family where the kids were just in bad shape and they were hungry. It was a lot going on. And so finally, there was a report made. And as soon as the report was made and they had a caseworker, those kids were pulled from our campus and listed as homeschooling, and the caseworkers couldn't find the said child or the kids. It was a family. And so they couldn't find them for months. And we don't know what happened after that. So the next year, the family came back and tried to enroll at our campus. And instantly, after the kids got interviewed, they were withdrawn to homeschool. And the kids were still in bad shape. There was only so much that we could do, right? Our hands were tied ultimately. And a few months later, I got an email from like a caseworker in a town that was like 4 hours away asking if they had come back this way, because apparently there was a case made in that town. And so they're trying to track down the kids as well. And so again, they were listed as homeschooled, and they thought maybe just in case, So again, no one could find the kids. And that story is repeated over and over again, and that's what we call the invisible kid. Next, let's talk about the Homeschool Safe Act and the critical gaps, right? So with these gaps, we're saying that the act is saying they want to ban abusers. They want to ban people convicted of specific violent crimes, especially against kids, from homeschooling. That to me seems like common sense. Like that should be a no-brainer. That should have been on the books. We shouldn't have to be fighting for that because those kids deserve protection from these people who have demonstrated very dangerous behavior. Next, preventing isolation during investigation. So there should be a policy that stops parents from withdrawing a kid from school to homeschool within 3 years of an abuse or neglect investigation. I think this helps prevent abusers from isolating kids from mandated reporters and potential interventions. Next, I think there should be some, or not me, the act itself, but I guess I agree with it, requires home educators to notify their local superintendent of their intent to homeschool at the start of each year, because this is going to help track kids and make sure they're not falling through the cracks and prevents families from using homeschooling as a shield or a cover for educational neglect or abuse. Again, so that could have been the case with that family, right? If they just notified it. And here in Texas, you don't have to notify but one time if your kid was enrolled in school. So like with my oldest, I just had to send, an email. This is what I'm doing. That was the end of the conversation. Never heard from them again. Then with my middle kid, she's never been to school. So I've never had to notify her. And while I feel like I'm doing, her justice by giving her a quality education and not neglecting her and not abusing her, I know that's not the case for other homeschool kids. And again, this isn't the whole act. You can go to their website. I was just pulling some pieces out of there that I thought were important to discuss. I think educational standards within this act, this mandates that homeschool kids learn the same core subjects as their public school peers. And this protects a kid's right to a well-rounded education and prevents them from deliberately withholding crucial knowledge. So if you go to the Responsible Homeschool Coalition's Instagram page, they have a graphic that was recently posted that it was quotes from girls who were homeschooled where their parents didn't give them access to any science simply because they were a girl. Now, if there were some standards set, like I want the standard set, but I don't want you to tell me that I have to teach, very sterile, whitewashed history. Like I want to teach history, but I don't want it to be whitewashed in that way. I want girls to have access to science. I think it's dangerous when we're limiting access to information in that way. But anyway, so that is my spill. Those are some important ones. And I think, you should be aware of and what's going on in this act. So let's talk about Texas. Texas homeschool laws are notoriously relaxed. There's minimum oversight, which is appealing to some. Like for me, it is very appealing, but it does create vulnerabilities for kids. So this lack of regulation makes Texas a state where the Make Homeschool Safe Act could have a significant and I believe positive impact. But we're in Texas. Texans, they like, what is it? Small government. I don't think it's going to pass in general and all, but I know we need to be aware of specific laws in our state, specifically in Texas, and advocate for changes that prioritize the safety and well-being of our kids. And I do understand the concerns about government overreach, but we have to be vigilant and ensure that any regulations that are implemented fairly and don't disproportionately target specific communities, which again, I get why people aren't supportive. I am a BIPOC woman myself who homeschools. I don't want the government overreach, but that piece of my heart has empathy for those kids that are out there. And I know this current political climate, we're going to be targeted. We would be the communities that would get targeted. They want, again, that line of church and state is being very blurry right now. So if we're not in that specific area, it could be dangerous for us. Um, but we also can't let the fear of government interference paralyze us from taking action to protect kids. We do need to be a part of the conversation. We should contact our representatives and share our stories and advocate for policies that prioritize the safety and educational rights of all kids, whether they're homeschooled or public schooled. We need to be the voice of the kids. Here are some behaviors to look for a kid who might be experiencing some physical and emotional abuse. This can go beyond spanking and hitting, which I think is abusive, but in the state of Texas, that's not. It could look like a kid flinching or becoming defensive when touched, or there's unexplained injuries or excessive crying or fearfulness around the caregiver, and also some withdrawal of social interaction. Another could be emotional abuse, and I think we all know emotional abuse can be as damaging as physical abuse, and it's that constant like criticism, belittling, name calling, threats, intimidation. Homeschooling kids who might experience emotional abuse may exhibit signs of low self-esteem, anxiety, depression, or difficulty forming healthy relationships, and they might also become overly compliant or withdrawn. So, observe for patterns of like controlling behavior by their caregiver, um, or the caregiver isolating the kid from friends and family, or isolating them when they're at community events, and also restricting their access to information. This is a very big one, and just keep, you know, an eye on it. Next is educational neglect. So, lack of like any kind of consistent access to instruction, because this might involve no curriculum, irregular lessons. And I know that there are people who unschool, but like, giving their kids access to the information or like their interests, right? Their child-led interests. If they're not even accessing them that, then it's not necessarily unschooling, right? So that falls under that educational neglect. Look for signs of kids' inability to read or write at an appropriate age level, or basic knowledge of core subjects, or just a general disinterest in learning. Those could be signs of educational neglect. Another thing to check out is failure to address special needs. So if a kid has a diagnosed disability or a learning difference, educational neglect can involve failing to provide necessary accommodations or therapies, or just trying to get them the support that they need, again, so they can perform at an equal playing field. And the last thing I want to talk about is the isolation and lack of socialization. So while some level of isolation happens in homeschooling, right? Uh, a severe restriction of social interaction can be a form of neglect. And this can involve parenting preventing the child from interacting with any kids at all, or participating in any extracurricular activities, or even just leaving the house. This definitely can hinder the kid's social and emotional development. Again, these are things just to keep an eye out for. What can you do if you feel like a kid might be experiencing some sort of abuse and neglect? Build a relationship with the kid. I think this is crucial because kids are more likely to confide in someone that they trust, and when you focus on creating a safe and supportive environment, this could involve just casual conversation, shared activities, or simply being a consistent and friendly presence. But don't pry, don't push if the kid doesn't want to talk. Um, a simple just, how are you doing, can go a long way, because the goal is to become someone that the kid feels comfortable and safe approaching. Next, document your concerns. Keep some records if you feel like you've observed something that falls in the categories of, abuse or neglect. Um, be objective and be factual. Avoid making assumptions or judgments. So, for example, instead of saying, I think that parents are neglectful, what you could do is write, on Tuesday, you know, February 3rd, I noticed the kid was wearing the same dirty clothes as the day before, and they mentioned they were hungry and didn't have dinner. This documentation will be essential if you decide to take any further action. And the last thing is you can report your concerns to appropriate authorities. So if you have reasonable cause to suspect abuse or neglect, you are legally and ethically obligated to report it. This might involve contacting CPS or law enforcement. Don't hesitate to reach out even if you're unsure. It's better to err on the side of caution. And remember, you're not alone in this. There are resources to help, like on the Responsible Homeschooling Coalition website. I know I've had to report, again, working at a school. I know reporting can be daunting, but it's taking the first step in protecting a vulnerable kid. As we close out this episode of the Secular Homeschool Revolution, I want to leave you with this. Our kids are our future, and their education is our responsibility. So let's continue to challenge the status quo, question the system in place, and build a world where every kid has the opportunity to thrive. Keep revolutionizing because education is a form of activism. And if you liked what you listened to today, please share it with other secular progressive homeschoolers. Leave a review, leave a comment, follow me on TikTok, secular_homeschool_mama, MAMA. Or you can find me on Instagram, which I got to get better at responding on, for secular_homeschool_revolution. On my Instagram, I get really cool messages. I don't get that much comments, but I've gotten some really kind and thoughtful messages. So thank you guys. And until next time, again, like I said, keep revolutionizing. And I thank y'all for being a part of the movement.